Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. I'm Ken Dwight and happy to have all of you here. We'll be talking for the next hour or so about how do you deal with malware. Especially once we get past some of these technical issues. There we go. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Ken Dwight and I appreciate you taking the time to be on this webinar. I believe you'll find it well worth your time. A little bit about myself. In spite of my youthful appearance, as you can see from that actually fairly recent photo, I've been in the computer business since 1966. Started off as a programmer trainee on mainframe computers way back then, and so I've got a lot of scars. I've seen a lot of changes in the industry, obviously. And I got into the PC part of the industry back in 1982. IBM introduced their personal computer in '81, so about a year later I decided these things were probably here to stay and went ahead and got into that industry. So had a PC since '82, and I started working in the Windows environment since '86. And of course, it's been mostly Windows and PCs since then. But in 2002, something happened that changed the direction of my consulting practice. A virus came along called KLEZ, K-L-E-Z, which some of you may have had some exposure to or been familiar with. It, as far as I was concerned, changed the whole landscape of what viruses were all about. They'd been around for a while, and we knew about them and had antivirus programs back then, but they weren't that big a problem. But with KLEZ, and in my experience at least, that changed everything about them. So that's when I decided to develop a specialty in viruses. And since then, I've done a lot of training of computer techs all around the country. So far, I've been in 38 states in the U.S., plus 2 territories and 4 foreign countries. I am based in Houston, so this is home. But again, I get all over the place to wherever people need the information. One of my other claims to fame was my book. I wrote the best-selling book about computer viruses called Bug-Free Computing: Stop Viruses, Squash Worms, and Smash Trojan Horses. This first came out in 2005, and it was actually written more for the end-user audience. It's not a geek book, although it does have some technical content in it, but it's mostly for the average users to give them more awareness of things they can do to be more protected against viruses, worms, and Trojan horses, as the subtitle implies. It did win an award, the IPI Award from Independent Publisher magazine, so I was very happy with that. The second printing was in 2006, and at one time it was actually available on websites in 11 foreign countries. Wasn't translated into any foreign languages, but it at least was available in those other countries. And as far as I know, it became the best-selling book on computer viruses. Now, it is out of print. I'm not pitching that today, but I mainly wanted to at least let you know that I can write and have written a lot on the subject. That was a 186-page book, and I've had something like 70 articles published on the subject. So I definitely have a lot to say about viruses and malware in general. And once again, we're dealing with a technical issue. There we go. A little bit of housekeeping. I do encourage questions. Now, I've given this presentation enough times that I pretty much know what to expect in terms of questions, so I'll probably answer most of those in line as they come along. But if there's a particular question that comes up, go ahead and use the chat box over in the right-hand side of your screen and just type that in there. I'll be monitoring those, and if it's something that I'm talking about at the moment that would fit right in, I'll be glad to go ahead and pick it up. But I do have an official time for Q&A at the end of the session, so we'll try to cover all of that and make sure that everything you came here for is addressed. Just to make sure we've got the right audience in here today, this is really intended for geeks, people that do tech support for a living or have a good bit of experience along those lines, so we won't throw out any strange terms that the average user wouldn't understand. Now, you may be an individual tech working in a support organization. It could be a third-party support organization supporting users that don't have their own in-house IT department, or some people that may be on the line from IT departments. Also, your corner computer store, computer sales and repair shops obviously need this information, and computer consultants like me, people that are just out there in the trenches solving their clients' problems as they come along. So that's who the audience is intended to be, and anybody's welcome, but just from looking at the attendee list, I think you all fit into that general category. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish today. First of all, we'll clarify some of the terminology and definitions. A lot of terms are used, and people think they know what they're saying or mean, but there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion, so I'll at least give an overall structure as far as what some of these terms are all about. I'll talk about some of the things that have changed about malware over the years, how different they are today from what they were in the early days, or even as recently as a year or two ago. We'll talk about the traditional approaches to dealing with these issues, and how in a lot of cases these approaches don't work anymore. They may not be available to you at all, or they might not be effective. So in the process, we'll also get into some alternative solutions. Now, I was talking to one gentleman the other day that said, Ken, I really appreciate your articles. You've got great newsletters. I like the fact that you're doing this free webinar, but how do you get paid? What's in it for you? And that's a fair question. So we'll tell you a little bit about what's coming, because at the end of this, there will be an opportunity for you to give me some money. But along the way, I want you to get some really useful and actionable information out of this presentation. So in addition to the webinar itself, I am constantly monitoring what's going on in the whole landscape of viruses and other forms of malware and filtering a lot of information for you. So what you get from me has been filtered and distilled, so it has been vetted. It's reliable, accurate information you can act on related to malware, and it's constantly being updated. In this webinar itself, I do expect to give you information you can start using right away. But again, it will be an opportunity for you to learn more in depth going beyond this, but that's the ultimate objective. So to start off with, just a little bit of a review, and here again, you already know this, but just to put some numbers on it, there was an article in USA Today not long ago that talked about a study that Microsoft did. They scanned PCs of 5.7 million consumers and small business owners over a period of about 15 months. What they found out of that sampling was over 3.5 million of those were infected, 62% infection rate. Now, the article said virus. I assume it actually meant any form of malware, of which viruses would be one. We'll talk again about definitions in just a few minutes here. But one of the interesting things about that article was it pointed out about 35% of them came through what we think of as the traditional methods of computers getting infected, through email, through instant messaging programs, or peer-to-peer file sharing sites. And all these are situations where the user did something that led to the infection. But the rest of them, 65%, spread with no action by the victim required. Now, let me just say that a different way. Traditionally, when somebody's computer has been infected by a virus or other form of malware, a logical first question is, what did you do wrong? What this article is saying is that in 65% of the cases, they didn't do anything wrong. Now, I'm not sure that that's exactly accurate. That's what the article said, but it may have been a more subtle way of getting the user to do something wrong. The point is, there are certainly viruses and other malware today that will spread without the user doing anything wrong. Now, some definitions, because again, you hear a lot of these terms tossed out, and they may have different meanings or different from what people think they mean when they say it. The overall catch-all term that describes all of this is malware, and that would refer to malicious or malevolent software, software that is out there to hurt you. Now, some of it isn't hurting you by design, but that's a side effect, if not the design intent. Three general categories here. The first and largest one is viruses. Now, the definition of a virus is a program that spreads from one computer to another, period. It doesn't say anything about doing damage or anything else. If it spreads from one computer to another, that fits the textbook definition of a virus. And the early viruses didn't cause any damage. They just spread and popped up a message that says, ha ha, I got you. It was basically bored kids or techies trying to prove how cool they were, showing what they could do, but there was no real damage from them. Obviously, the viruses we're concerned about today do cause damage along the way. Within the overall category of viruses, there are two subclasses we're especially concerned about, worms and Trojan horses. And important distinctions with each one of these. A worm is a form of virus that spreads from what from one computer to another and does damage along the way. So we're always concerned about a worm. Anytime you have a worm, you need to get rid of it. But there's another important distinction in the definition of a worm versus a pure virus. That is that a virus infects an existing file on the computer, most commonly a Windows component or an Office document of some kind or another. On the other hand, a worm puts a new file on the computer that wasn't there before. So even though a worm is typically more destructive than a virus, they're also typically more easily removed, because once you know you have a worm, you've identified what it is, you can delete it and at least stop the damage. There may be some remediation to be done to clean up the damage that was done by the worm, but the point is you can delete it and stop the damage from recurring. The third category, a Trojan horse, as the name implies, comes along with something else you've downloaded, sometimes knowingly, sometimes without being aware of it. You hear the term drive-by download, a download that comes to your computer without you doing anything or without the user doing anything to let it in. A Trojan is like a worm in the sense that it is a new program that goes on the computer that wasn't there before. So like a worm, when you know you're dealing with a Trojan, you can delete it and at least stop the damage there. Within each of these, there's an objective, something they're trying to accomplish. That's known as the payload. And a couple of common payloads of viruses, worms, and Trojan horses would be a keystroke recorder, also known as a keylogger. That's used to record every keystroke you enter on the keyboard and can be used in ways we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Another common payload would be a backdoor, giving the virus author a way of getting back into that system at a later time for whatever they might want to do. The second major category of malware we'll talk about here just briefly is adware. Adware refers to any form of advertising that's coming through the internet or your email. And adware is not designed to hurt you. It's designed just to make money. It's mostly annoying, things like banner ads, pop-ups, things that don't really hurt anything, but they're just a nuisance to look at and have to deal with. But adware also encompasses some conscious decisions you've made. For instance, if you get a free program that comes with advertising, that would be an example of adware, where the paid version doesn't have the advertising. And a common example of that, especially as related to virus issues, would be an antivirus program like AVG. The free version includes advertising. The paid version doesn't. So the point is, with adware, sometimes it's a conscious decision that the user has made. The last bullet point here is spyware. Spyware is a form of adware that crosses the line into being more intrusive and more invasive of your system. Spyware is actively monitoring what the user is doing, what websites they're going to, what kind of searches they're doing, with the idea of being able to sell that information to potential advertisers or spammers. Spyware was a big problem. We see less of it these days, and it's become more virus-like than being a separate entity than it was a few years ago. But here again, the purpose of spyware isn't to hurt you. The purpose is to make money. But in the process of doing all the things that it did, spyware would typically degrade performance a lot, so it led to a lot of performance issues, computer getting too slow because of a lot of spyware. The final category has become one of the fastest growing, one of the most prevalent these days, what's known as the rogue security programs, also referred to as scareware. These are the programs you've all seen that pop up, usually at Windows startup time, saying, warning, 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 I found 538 viruses on your computer. Click here, give me your credit card, and I'll take care of them. Those are all bogus. We'll talk about those separately in just a minute here. But those are the general categories of malicious software we're dealing with these days, with some very significant differences between the different categories. First, viruses, worms, and Trojan horses. These do represent the single biggest threat to your client's computers today. Part of the reason for that is they are so prevalent. They're so widespread and so many new ones coming out. Every year you hear the new statistics about how many more there are. The first quarter of 2011, by most estimates, there were more new viruses and more malicious threats released than all of 2010 combined. And before that, in 2010, there were more new threats than the previous 20 years combined. So not only are the number of viruses and other threats growing, but it's growing exponentially. So it's becoming more and more of a problem. Not only that, the newest viruses are infecting more computers. They're getting harder to remove and much less likely to be detected than ever before. Again, the fact is that most viruses are there to make money. The longer they can stay on a computer undetected, the more money they can make. So where the early viruses, it was very obvious that you had one, you'd do something about it, their gravy train would stop. So today, what I refer to as traditional viruses, worms, and Trojan horses, want to stay undetected for as long as possible. And as much as the users would like to think otherwise, preventing these requires much more than just an antivirus program. Most of the serious malware these days is very effective at defeating or getting around most of the antivirus programs that are out there running.